Hello, and welcome to episode 15 of Cooking with Grief, the comedy podcast equivalent of shooting an unarmed gorilla in the face. My name's Chris, but helpfully, I'm always joined by someone else called Chris, or perhaps you know him best by his wrestling name, the Naked Slipper.
I don't even know how to respond to that intro.
Good, right, so here's how the podcast works. 2 Chris's, 2 topics each, we take turns to talk about them. We digress, we transgress, we cross-dress. It's all broadly fine. Basically, we pick 2 things we've read about in a week, which we think will make for an interesting chat, and we talk about them. And that's it, really. But for new listeners, you might not be aware that we have a semi-regular feature called Kurt Russell Facts with Chris.
I have learnt that somewhere in Hawaii, which is quite vague because, it's made up of several islands, each of which contains several towns and cities, so it could take a while to hunt it down, unless you just Google it. But somewhere in Hawaii, there is a restaurant called The Pig and the Lady. And in the bathroom there is a shrine to the Kurt Russell film Big Trouble in Little China.
I would ask why, but we might get
because
bogged
it
down
is
before
an
we even get started.
absolutely fantastic film, that's why.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough, but why is it in the bathroom of a little restaurant?
Honestly, I don't know. But Kurt Russell has visited it.
Before or after the shrine?
After the shrine. He found out about it, and so he went there to check it out.
Good, I guess. Thank you for that fact. I have a Kurt Russell fact of my own.
Is it another one of your anagrams?
How dare you question the integrity of my research? I actually looked on Wikipedia, and I learned that Kurt Russell was born on the 17th of March 1951 and is an American actor.
Wow, you really dived deep for that, didn't you?
Yeah, I read the first sentence and I thought, that'll do.
Wow.
So, right, so on to the main topics. Chris, what's your first little brain niblet for us?
So, Chris, have you ever been asked to do something that you are woefully underqualified for, but, still gone and done your best anyway?
I think that's pretty much how all of us navigate through adult life, isn't it? You come out of uni with a degree going, I'm employable, and the world goes, no, you're not. And you go, well, I will do a menial job for a while.
Well, yes, I suppose in a way you're right. But I'd say most millennials have nothing on Jeffrey Tandy. Let's go back to World War II. In merry old England, and as I'm sure you and our highly educated listeners are aware, during World War II, Britain was trying to crack the Enigma code that the Germans used to coordinate their U-boats and attack British shipping. And to break the coded messages, the Ministry of Defence, or it was probably the War Ministry back then, they contacted various people who could work as cryptogrammists. So I had to read that because this is an important point, the name of it. So they needed cryptogrammists.
Yeah, they did it through crosswords, didn't they? They advertised, they did a super difficult crossword, and then if you got it all right, they thought, we like the way your brain works.
Yeah, exactly. That was part of it, and they also just looked for people who might be doing similar roles in there. Alan Turing, obviously being the most famous code breaker down at Bletchley Park. But Jeffrey Tandy was not a cryptogrammist. He was a cryptogamist. It's like cryptogrammist, but with only one R. A cryptogamist. And Bletchley Park recruited him. Unfortunately, a cryptogamist is in fact an expert in seaweed, mosses, ferns, and algae, which, as you may or may not be aware, are not known for their clever codes.
No, but they often are found near U-boats.
Yes, and in a great twist of fate, that will actually come back later.
Excellent.
Yeah, nice foreshadowing. Is it foreshadowing if we point it out beforehand? Or is it just a blatant...
Is it foreshadowing if I'm standing here going, I am now foreshadowing something that it will happen soon. Be impressed.
But yeah, so anyway... Mr. Tandy, he gets recruited despite being an expert in a completely different field because he actually worked at the Natural History Museum. So they hired him, and he was sent to Bletchley Park to try and help crack the code, and he did his best, even though it was nothing to do with what he knew. still, which is good. I don't know if he told anybody this isn't what he was like an expert in, or if they just didn't care,
or if he was just known as a weird seaweed guide. It's like, okay, well, we know that the first digit is 0. Anything to report. It is not seaweed. Thank you very much for your contribution. Moving on.
But yeah, so for 2 years he was working there from 1939 to 1941. And there's no real data on how many codes he successfully cracked, but I imagine it probably wasn't that high. Maybe I'm underselling him here. He could have been a naturalite. Who knows? But in 1941, a German U-boat was sank, and on that U-boat, they actually managed to salvage some valuable items, including the conversion tables that were used the Germans used to convert their coded messages. So obviously they had the cipher, but it had got rather soggy, having been in a U-boat that's just sank. So step in Jeffrey Tandy, expert with dealing with seaweed and preserving underwater specimens, who steps in and uses the knowledge, how to preserve the wet paper without damaging the ink, keep it in a readable condition, and then they use that to get the conversion tables. And also, because he worked at the Natural History Museum, he also was able to, he knew who to call to get all the equipment that was needed to do it. And so there you go.
That's great. So if you, just so you know, that the foreshadowing we shouted about earlier, this is now the callback to the earlier foreshadowing. Be impressed. But what I like is, the idea that for years, maybe the other scientists bullied him or made fun of him, and then suddenly they burst in with this, and he goes, "Finally, it's my time to shine." My God, is anyone here a crypto gamma? He's basically Rudolph, yeah. Yeah, his shiny nose was...
They used to call him his shiny nose on Foggy Christmas Eve. That was his Foggy Christmas Eve.
And then Santa said, "Won't you remove this seaweed from this conversion table?" He goes,
He wasn't removing seaweed. That's quite an easy thing to do. The seaweed off.
Everyone else is going, "It's so slimy." And he goes, "I'll do it." My God, you're a hero.
The fact that he knew how to preserve the paper without messing it up. Give George Tandy some props.
You're right,
George Jeffrey Tandy, get his name right.
Yeah, can you give props to the wrong person by mistake? He was a loser, but his brother, God, George, what a hero.
So yeah, that's how, if you ever find yourself woefully underqualified, maybe your specific skills will come in handy several years later in a situation you could not have possibly foreseen. Actually, no, you probably could have foreseen the idea that stuff in U-boats might get wet, so maybe it wasn't entirely stupid. That concludes our my first topic. Over to you.
For my first topic, I'll ask you, Chris, what's the thing you've sacrificed most for?
I don't know. I'm really not heroic enough to make difficult decisions and had to sacrifice stuff. I just tend to meander down the path of least resistance and see where I end up.
It's a good tagline for the podcast, though. You say you're not sacrificed anything. Maybe if you were born in an English village called Eam in 1665, you might have been braver, or maybe you would have bucked the trend and been the coward your descendants turned out to be. Because in 1665 it was the height of the bubonic plague, which was super popular at the time. So this tailor orders some cloth and stuff from London where the plague's in full merriment, and the cloth was riddled with fleas which were carrying the plague, and the tailor died as a result. But then the good people of Eam, they'd seen enough historical zombie movies to know what happens when an infection breaks. So they quarantined the entire village, even though it meant, almost certain death for them. But as a result, they saved neighbouring villages and towns from the spread of the plague, and they actually managed to contain it, even though 2/3 of the population of the village died horribly.
Oh, that's very heroic and depressing.
It is, but when I read about this, my theory was it was long enough ago that we could talk about it on a comedy podcast. And if it happened 2 years ago, I probably wouldn't have picked it.
In a moment of more foreshadowing, my second topic is going to push that maxim to the very limit. So,
if your second topic is the return of the bubonic plague in rural England in 2018, then we might be stepping on some tricky ground. By all accounts, the reason I liked it is that there's an oddly cinematic feel to it, because it's like if one person that's been exposed like breaks the quarantine, then the whole thing is for nothing. But it's quite impressive to like collectively decide to sacrifice. Like apparently, like the village like leader and the priest like came up with it and like pitched it, which is a hell of a sales pitch. You know, right? We've got a plan.
Yeah,
it will mean we all die, but we might save other people who you don't know. And knowing the sort of like rural England might have quite strong grudges against neighbouring villages because they once stole a ham or something. But you know, it's sort of the closest real life's ever got to the decisions you see in a zombie movie, where you know one person in the party gets bitten and you decide to kick them out, knowing it means certain death, but it might save the group. And it made me think that as a fellow coward, I would not have survived in a 17th century England, because I can barely survive in 21st century England, and I have access to both Leerdammer and high speed broadband. Those are my main two.
The most important pillars for life.
I like a smoky cheese and access to, news.
Yeah, that's what you're calling it.
Eye-watering news, yeah.
Related fact, I don't know if any other villages self-quarantined, but, sometimes areas were quarantined, maybe forcibly, maybe voluntarily, I don't know. But if you ever see somewhere called something like Butterstyle Lane, something along, like a food and style or something like that. Butterstyle's one that I know. It is actually named after the place where they'd leave the butter on the stile, which is that weird little thing for climbing over fences. They'd leave the butter there for the villagers to come and get, so that they could leave food there for them without anybody having to go touch them. You'd go leave it at the fence.
So it was like a medieval Deliveroo.
Yes, only not door to door, because they didn't want plague.
No, but you can leave in the instructions, just leave the food outside, and then you don't have to interact with anyone,
that's true.
And you just get to scuttle out of your house in a dressing gown and get a kebab for free. Not for free, but it feels like for free, because it's just
for free.
It's just miracle doner meat.
Plague must have been that. I mean, the plague.
Well, you had to say the plague must have been awful.
Are bad enough. Well, yeah, but what I mean is, like, it's bad enough if it happens nowadays and we have some sort of understanding of what it is and what's causing it. Like, back then, they didn't know what microbes were and viruses or bacteria, so they were just like, right, there's something going around, probably caused by the devil, or maybe even God himself if he's really pissed off with us, and it basically means if you go near somebody, there's a high... Yeah, exactly. It's like if he's reverted back to his crazy youth. Yeah, he's basically, if you go too near somebody, you will die fucking horribly. And we have no idea what's causing it. Probably demons, but we don't really know for sure. And we have no idea how to stop it.
And I think that makes their decision to quarantine even more, like, heroic in a way. Because to them, it's not like, oh, well, this person contracted the plague and we must, contain the plague and, burn the tailor's house or whatever. They're thinking an evil spirit, I don't know, but an evil spirit has been sent from London. I don't know how they realise, oh, well, we must surround ourselves with this, but not let it out into the countryside. You know what I mean? It's like a... It's a tricky one to get your head around. I mean, do you think you'd last long in the event of a, let's say a zombie apocalypse? It would be the nearest sort of cinematic equivalent.
Would I last long? No.
I know you're well stocked with, tins and stuff. You eschew dry,
that is true.
Fresh pasta in favour of dry pasta.
But the only problem is, as mentioned, I am a coward. And the other problem is, I'm not even particularly dark, but I hang out with lots and lots of pasty white people. So by cinematic convention, I will be the darkest member of the group, which therefore means I'm ripe for dying early. There's some things you just can't fight.
In the same way that I always seem to, whenever I'm in a sort of horror movie scenario, I always find myself drawn to take a shower in a spooky haunted house for no apparent reason. And it means that I often die first with gratuitous side boob on show, but enough about my hobbies. Good, right, we'll cover the plague. So that's the end of my first topic. Chris, what have you got for your second one?
You know how sometimes you see, there's two people who are sort of, their lives are intertwined, but one of them is like quite nice and stuff, and the other one's a massive dickhead, and you sort of like, how the hell are you two like friends or, work together or whatever?
Making a podcast together.
Yes, exactly. And we'll leave the listeners to decide which one of us is which. So I'd like to start by mentioning Joan of Arc, good old Joni, who, to give her a real title, Saint Joan of Arc, I think. Is she a saint? I feel like she's a saint. Yes, she's a saint. So obviously she's been honoured by the Catholic Church as a saint, and we tend to hold saints in quite high esteem, given that, they're saints. Yeah, so obviously she fought in the 100 Years' War against England. She claimed to have had visions telling her to, fight for French victory, independence. I have no idea. I honestly don't know much about the 100 Years' War. Apart from that, it was between France and England, and it lasted approximately, but not exactly, and I think, in fact, slightly more than 100 years. But yeah, so obviously she is a saint. She was apparently sent visions by God, and who tends to, you'd think, tends to keep his visions for the worthy. And for all her troubles, she was burnt alive at the age of 19 because life is cruel and horrible, and sometimes God sends you visions which will lead to a horrific death.
For her troubles, like what you say, like for tipping someone for slightly better than adequate service.
Exactly. So that's one side of this particular double act. The other one, her comrade in arms, a man called Gilles de Rais. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. Who was a knight and lord, and he fought alongside Joan of Arc in the 100 Years' War, including at the famous Battle of Orleans. And whereas Joan of Arc was burnt horrifically at the stake at the age of 19, he was in fact appointed Marshal of France. So why do I bring him up? It's because, after Saint Joan of Arc was burnt horrifically alive, in Gilles' later years, he killed hundreds of children horrifically for his own amusement. Remember when I said I was really going to push this? If something happened in the past, can we talk about it? Put it this way, his Wikipedia page has the following segments. Ignoring the the usual preamble and the bit at the bottom and all that. The main segments of his Wikipedia page are early life, military career, private life, and then medieval serial killer. So this is where we're going. You know what? In the interest of good taste, I'm not even going to go into the details. But basically, he was thought to have murdered between, I've lost the figure. It was between 80 and I think it was 200 children. Yes, I was right.
I mean, that is more than you could plausibly claim as a mistake.
Yes, exactly. I mean, because that's the thing, obviously we have horrific serial killers nowadays, but because most of them tend to be, well, that's the scary thing about them. They're just like normal people. And, you don't know who they are. Whereas back in the day, if you're a lord, you can command peasants to turn over your children at any particular, you don't even have to give a reason. If anybody asks a reason, you just kill them too. And nobody's going to do a damn thing about it. Turns out, you could be a lot more prolific. The only slight good news, in the loosest sense of the term, is that he was caught eventually and convicted and confessed and was hung to death. So he managed, for his troubles, he managed to have a less horrific death than the 19-year-old Joan of Arc. Because life is cruel and unfair, and especially so if you were a medieval peasant or even, Well, yeah, just medieval in general, I suppose.
Or a woman.
Yeah, or a woman. Just going back to the horrific murder, the only reason he was caught was because at one point he kidnapped a bishop because he had a dispute at a church, and that prompted an investigation. I mean, yeah, he is not a good man. If it was Vikings, though, we'd be able to laugh about it, because everybody laughs and jokes about how the Vikings raped and pillaged their way across Europe. Or pirates. Pirates get kids theme park rides and Johnny Depp starring movies and whatnot, and it all looks very whimsical, despite the fact they literally just pillaged their way across the seven seas, murdering countless people and stealing their livelihoods.
Okay, in what year is the humorous Joan of Arc and subsequent butchering of children theme park opening up in a Disney park near you?
Well, it's hard to say because Vikings are obviously pre-Joan of Arc, whereas pirates are post-Joan of Arc. So it's hard to know when exactly we know what the tragedy is.
So what's the deciding factor that
tragedy plus time equals comedy. So I suppose the scale of tragedy.
How lucrative the book deal was.
Eye patches, like you say, always whimsical. Whether or not Johnny Depp, because I don't think Johnny Depp will play a convincing Joan of Arc as good as an actor as he is. So that hinders it.
You're right, that is the thing that makes it not funny.
I was going to say, if this podcast goes well and we make a lucrative multimedia deal, how about we open up Joan of Arc theme park?
Well, do we not need to have a series of, a franchise of hit movies first?
No, they come after.
We get the theme park based.
No, let's go straight to the theme park. Joan de Parc.
From the people who brought you the most bloodthirst. Good, solid, clean, family-friendly fun.
Okay, so please, for the love of God, help us climb off this pyre of our own making and rescue us. Please, for the love of God, make this lighthearted again.
Listener, we don't tell each other what topics we're going to talk about beforehand because we think it's more interesting to surprise each other and, we can sort of react off the cuff rather than, pre-plan, what segment's going to flow into another. Sometimes it works, and sometimes I have to follow up that topic with the following question. Chris, if you could hunt any animal to death, what would it be?
Obviously, it'd be the most dangerous game.
Geese.
Man.
Oh.
Wait, no, sorry, I don't want to get arrested. I'd say those big-ass snakes, which... like pythons or anacondas, just because they fill my least favourite Venn diagram
it's pronounced
ever.
asp.
No, like pythons and anacondas. Because if you do a Venn... I've probably said this before. Well, I've definitely said this before. May have said it before on this podcast. But if you do a Venn diagram of animals that can eat you whole and animals that can fit in through your toilet, pythons and anacondas are the only things that would be in the centre. And that's my least favourite Venn diagram ever.
So the opposite of that would be an elephant, which can do neither.
Yes. An elephant, not going to fit in through your toilet, can't eat you whole. Like a great white shark, eat you whole, but, you don't really have to worry about one of them coming up through the U-bend.
I really hope there's a W on the beginning of that word whole. We're laughing again. It's fine. Who brought it back? Right, the reason I asked that is because in this country, in the UK, it's perfectly legal to kill grey squirrels. We originally had a population of red squirrels, which were mercilessly hunted by immigrant invaders, but that has nothing to do with any political beliefs. I personally welcome the grey squirrels, and I think they're fine. You can hunt grey squirrels. You just can't use landmines in case expensive small dogs step on them. But do you know in Australia what animal it is legal to hunt? One that you might not expect.
Is it the most
obviously.
Dangerous game?
It is. It is not.
So
man.
Not the most dangerous game. Oh, guess that's. I reckon. I have a feeling I might know this. Is it rabbits?
No, I think that would make for an unremarkable story. In this country you can kill pigeons, but in the
no, because there's a whole
the fabled lands of Australia, you can hunt
fence to try
rabbits.
And stop all the. They built a big fence to keep them out, and it failed miserably or something. Apparently, even the army got defeated by rabbits.
And yet Trump learned
what's
nothing.
Those research? Sorry to derail your topic before you even get going. But whilst I was trying to find topics for this week's episode, I found one which was that Napoleon once got attacked by a horde of rabbits and had to retreat.
You've got to stop taking hallucinogenics before bed. Fuck off, there's no way that Napoleon was killed by rabbits.
I didn't say killed, I said he had to run away.
Oh. I misheard. I thought famously he wasn't torn to bits by rabbits.
But he would have been if he hadn't ran.
Yeah, that's true. A narrow escape for the plucky conqueror. No, it's camels. In Australia, you're allowed to hunt camels. Sorry, I'm so...
Why?
Because there's loads of them. There's way too many.
How high is your voice going?
This is why I wouldn't be a good newsreader. Sorry, I've lost my mind temporarily. There's over 1 million wild and feral camels, and it's a problem.
Oh, what are they doing there? Why?
Just
surely camels, they just roam about a bit. Don't do much.
They get aggressive. They wreck. They run in wild packs. They're feral. They destroy houses and like rip out pipes, and it's a whole thing.
I read somewhere that Saudi Arabia actually has to import its camels from Australia because they don't have enough. But Australia, obviously, as you just mentioned, that apparently has tons.
Yeah, which begs the question: why, instead of killing them, why not just ship them off? If there's countries that want to buy them.
Right, here's a question for you then. If you were to be chased by a horde, would you rather it be a horde of camels or rabbits?
Like rabbit-sized rabbits. They're not like...
Or, yeah, I was going to say, new question. Without giving you a chance to answer, new question. What would you rather face? 50 rabbit-sized camels or one camel-sized rabbit? Jesus Christ, imagine how far a camel-sized rabbit could jump.
Yeah, and also...
Sorry, my mind is just broken entirely. Like,
yeah, me too. I feel like, yeah, there's absolutely no... I can't make a sentence. But the teeth of the rabbit are going to scale.
So like a saber-toothed rabbit.
Exactly, yeah. And they've got a feral kick on them, and I think if you scale it up, it's going to be an apex predator. Whereas...
Yeah, Christ.
You know...
What have we done?
Well, we haven't actually done anything. This is hypothetical. We don't have to take my answer and go, right, do it.
Chris, I've got the genetic material right here in the lab. Whatever you choose, I'm releasing.
Well, in that case, things it's definitely going to happen. I will fight lots of tiny camels because I feel like, regular camels, like, although they're aggressive, then the worst they're going to do is spit at you, and a tiny rabbit-sized spit isn't going to be, too much of a problem.
Yeah, I think that is the correct answer. Were there any other points you wanted to hit that we accidentally derailed on this talk of rabbits?
I think we covered the main point. There's loads of camels. It just seems like way too big of an animal to like let people hunt without any supervision.
What do you mean by supervision?
You can trust people to like tackle a squirrel, not literally.
Yeah, because they're crafty buggers.
Whereas, I don't know, just letting a sort of willing militia against camels seems a bit much.
It's weird though, because we're so, like, obviously in England, we don't have that hunting culture. In fact, we're quite strange because, normally in like, I say normally, but in like a lot of countries, hunting is seen as more of a lower class hobby. Whereas in Britain, you have to be posh to hunt, really.
Yeah, it's aristocratic.
Yeah, exactly. You walk around. It's like really weird in like, if you grow up in a city in England, you hear less gunshots than you do if you grow up in the posh countryside.
Yeah, and it's weird, like the sort of ceremony behind it, like fox hunting. I find very strange. Like it's quite a lot of kit to like
all the dress up
as I have, yeah, and like the trumpets and the dogs, and then they do like anointing with the blood, like on your first hunt, and they wipe your face with the fox, and it's all a bit like secret society. Yeah,
a bit bizarre. I was on holiday in America once, and like I say, these are just things you don't think about. Because like say, you go for a walk in the countryside in England, and as long as you're not walking through literally a farmer's like game reserve or something where he's shooting pheasants, you're safe. Whereas you walk through a forest in America and then suddenly you see signs saying you should be wearing bright orange because it's hunting season and we may mistake you.
It's like you could also encounter bears and mountain lions and stuff. Whereas it's like here you might come across a slightly aggressive cow or squirrel.
Not as bad as Napoleon and his rabbits, but it can still be quite a harrowing experience.
I can't believe he was torn to death by rabbits. That is, I love learning.
It turns out for the rest of the Napoleonic War, it wasn't actually Napoleon. It was just some guy who looked kind of like him.
I thought you were going to say it was a bunch of rabbits dressed up
secret.
like under an overcoat. They like it was actually like a coup, and they like assumed his form. Oh, we've learned absolutely nothing.
No, not a single thing of use. So Australia, camels. That's what we've learned.
Yep. Yeah, that's it.
If you want to shoot a large mammal, go to Australia and shoot a camel.
Yeah, that's your homework for this week, listeners. Hey, pals. Make sure you keep listening after the outro, because there's a message from some fellow podcasters about their podcast, which we think you'll really enjoy. And that brings us to the end of what I'm confident in saying was the most professional episode of Cooking with Grief yet. All the best news organisations just start crying with laughter in the middle of their very important segment.
Tell you what, though, that was an emotional roller coaster of an episode. It was like World War II, the plague, murdering medieval serial killers, and now we're going to just piss ourselves laughing about rabbits.
I mean, I think that was just an expression of, relief at getting away from bleak topics, even though I was worried that the slaughtering of camels might be a sensitive subject in itself. But luckily we made to...
this is a very dark episode.
Yeah, but luckily we found a way to completely demean all the serious topics we talked about.
Yes.
But
it's the only way we know how.
We are nothing if not childish. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and hopefully you'll join us for the next one. Until then, I've been Chris.
And I've been a different Chris.
And that's the way it works, because we're separate people.
Indeed. Though we have the same first name, we do not in fact share 100% of the same space and time.
I mean, sometimes we're in the same room.
I felt the need to clarify that.
No one was thinking...
Yes, but we don't physically occupy the exact same space.
Physically, no. Emotionally, also no.
Sometimes.
That is our dynamic outro as ever. Hopefully, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cooking with Grief. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to recommend it to a friend. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email cookingwithgrief@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter. That's @cookingwithgrief. If you'd like to hear more episodes, then please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you've got the time, then it'd be great if you could leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you.
Hello, we're the Firestarters podcast. Are you tired of having your hands cut off by unreliable history podcasts?
Or the inevitable heart attack that comes from non-specific content?
To listen to us, the podcast that breaks down every cultural reference of Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire in chronological order. Was it killed by H.H. Holmes? We don't know. Probably not.
Probably not. But I'm a real tightwad. Can I afford your podcast?
We're free on all podcast platforms and of such quality you'll think we suffer brain damage.
We do have the express permission of Billy Joel to do this, right? I just imagine it'd be really, really... Because they didn't understand the medium yet. And how advertising work. It's just a guy, it's like, this watch is awesome. And then just cuts.
That's the Firestarters podcast. Search us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from.